Jurists. Hi, Julie, from the International Commission of Jurists, Kenya. We have also APCOF, the African Policing Civilian Oversight Forum, which has its headquarters in South Africa, and the Tata Institute of Social Sciences from India, which its main campus is in Mumbai. Uh, the all of the triple AJD focuses on issues of public safety and justice, and we connect across these continents on a number of common concerns, many of which arise from our colonial legacy. A lot of our a lot of population is in poverty. We have a lack of developmental facilities, and also we are multicultural societies with very assertive collectivities. So within this host, this background context, we find a number of commonalities to move forward on the issues of public safety and justice and learn from each other. So that's where we are coming from. And police accountability is one of the core issues of the triple AJD. We've been working to see how we can make police more accountable, more legitimate and effective. And this has been a difficult ask, even without the pandemic of COVID, which has put things totally in disarray and amplified many of the problems. So that's what we are here to discuss today and see how, when we find that the security forces are on the front line response of COVID-19, how are they able to maintain an effective force, be seen to be legitimate, even when they're battling with their own citizens, so to protect the citizens' lives itself. And what kinds of issues does it throw up for the rule of law, for safeguarding human rights, also when the own safety of many of the frontline workers are at risk. We've had stone pelting, we've had a citizen chop off a policeman's hand in India. So you find all, besides just COVID, you find other kinds of threats to these security forces also. And we find that the crisis continues to unfurl and go beyond just human rights. And we're going to move forward from police accountability to other spheres of governance. But today, what we are going to be focusing is on how the justice actors and institutions are coping with the unprecedented situations that are cropping up. So before I hand over to Ruth Olafin to take over the webinar, I'm just going to quickly go through some of the the ways of working. Most of us are experts now at webinars, but just for those of us who are new, I'll quickly just run through some of the pointers. Please keep your audio on mute unless you're speaking, and keep your video on if your bandwidth allows. And certainly when you are speaking, we'd like to see and connect with you more than just audibly. So we'd like to see you when you're speaking. And we have a chat box that is on at all times. So all your comments, your concerns, the questions you have, please start typing them. We don't need to wait for the question and answer session. And there are certain documents also which are put up on our website, which will allow us, which we can see from all over anywhere, to what the international organizations have come up with, the guidelines or the responses to COVID-19. I think that would be a useful resource for all of us. And I think that's all that's coming from my end. I'm going to hand over to Ruth now.
All right. Yeah, thank you. Can everyone see me? Yeah, so thank you, Professor Renuka. Just as she has said, this webinar is focused on police response to COVID-19, specifically looking at it from a right-based perspective. COVID-19 is changing a lot of dynamics across the space. It has virtually touched all aspects of our lives. But critically, what has been the response of policing institutions across our board? What we have seen is worrying, and which is informing the reason why we said, okay, let's have experts come together to share experiences of what they are seeing within their space across Asia, across African countries What are we learning? Are there best practices? Of course, we're not going to ask the question if there have been rights violations. There have been rights violations in many countries, and that again calls to question: did we really prepare for the pandemic? Is any country really prepared? So part of the discussion will be looking at what has been police response to pandemic policing, specifically COVID-19. Has there been any kind of interagency collaboration, and what has been the success rate? And critically in this discussion, again, we're also going to be looking at what accountability tools have been put out there as part of COVID-19 measures. So you see that countries where you have COVID-19, there have been a lot of measures, preventive measures, and also task forces that have been sent out there to sort of enforce these laws. Police in each of these countries' contexts have also been empowered with additional responsibilities. Some have taken these powers beyond permissible levels, which is the reason why we say, hey, there's a need to have a discussion that, have a lens of right, look at it from the lens of right-based approach to what you're doing to law enforcement specifically. So without dwelling much, we have experts in the house from Kenya, from South Africa, from Nigeria, from India, who are going to share experience with us. I want to say that each speaker has 10 minutes for their own presentation. At the 8th minute, I will try to give you a signal that it's time to begin to round up. So you use the next 1 or 2 minutes to just wrap up your thought. I think it's an ongoing discussion, so it shouldn't just end on this platform. The Afro-Asia website is very interactive, so if there are more articles, more resources you want to share with us, please always come back to us. We'll be happy to post all of these. My name is Ruth Olofin, as Professor Renuka has said, and I'm the program manager at the Clean Foundation. The Clean Foundation is Center for Law Enforcement Education in Nigeria. I'm going to hand over to the Nigerian expert here, not because of any particular preference, but there's a whole lot that is happening right now. So he's been telling me since I got across to him that he has a trip to make. So at this point, I will hand over to Barrister Romy Mom. Barrister Romy Mom works as a Honorable Commissioner for the Police Service Commission, which is the oversight institution in Nigeria that oversees the Nigerian police. And he's also the president of Lawyers Alert, an NGO focused on promoting human rights. So he's going to share his experience with us because one, he's wearing two caps as it were. First from the oversight perspective and also coming with the civil society perspective. Part of what we send to you is also to look at what should be the role of civil society and even state duty bearers in terms of promoting rights-based approach to pandemic policing. So you're welcome, Barrister Romy Mom. You have the next 8 minutes to make your submission. Let's draw from your wealth of experience. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so very much, Ruth. I hope I can be heard.
Yes.
Great, and it's a pleasure to be here and catching up with persons I last saw in Miami. Speaking about Julie. Yeah, I think in Nigeria, I believe just like in other parts of the world, and especially Asia, the problems or the experiences that we're having is basically the same. In Nigeria, for instance, enforcement would seem to emphasize on force and corporal punishment, where citizens are seen to be disobeying the lockdown directives. So it's not impossible to see police officers engaging in assaults like slapping persons or flogging them and all of that, and insisting they go back and stay home. And of course, this does not apply as across board. If you are a well-heeled citizen, the upper class, you can either talk your way through or pay your way through, as the case might be. And so even within these violations, there are discriminations in the violations, as it were, where you have those who are down there being subjected to very undignifying and inhuman treatment in enforcing the lockdown, while others pay their way through, as the case will be. And so it's a difficult situation again to understand, because the economic situation of citizens here in Nigeria makes it impossible to tell people to stay at home for all through a period suddenly. Most are daily income earners, and they have to come out to earn a living. There was a video that trended in Nigeria recently, and it's true, of a taxi driver who was stopped and told he couldn't go out to carry passengers, and he had to feed his family. So what he did in protest was to strip completely naked on the streets and say, look, I'd rather die and go naked than go home and not being able to feed my family. But these are real stories, and it should give us cause for thinking as to how prepared we are when these issues hit our jurisdictions and countries. For the Nigerian police, I can say with authority that there was no kind of preparation that was specific to the pandemic. What we had was simply bringing police officers together and talking to them, go out there and be firm in insisting that citizens stay at home and all of that. So it was just like an assignment. Nevertheless, they have been involved in similar assignments of a different nature in the past. For example, elections. Elections in Nigeria is like the lockdown, where you are not supposed to go out beyond a certain precinct to go and vote and go back home. So garnering on that experience is what the Nigerian police is sitting on in enforcing this lockdown. Don't forget, in Nigeria and as in most other countries, we also had the Ebola. And all these are, for me, are experiences that outside of a specific training to pandemic, to COVID-19, people used in approaching what is in issue now, which is COVID-19. Interagency collaboration has been excellent in Nigeria, if you ask me. When I talk about interagency, I'm talking about security outfits going out there to work together. Because in Nigeria, we don't have enough police officers. There are insufficient police officers to the citizens. Just about 350,000 police officers to about 200 million people, which is basically very, very, very underwhelming. So the authorities brought in other security agencies like the Road Safety Corps, Civil Defense, and all of that, and they have been collaborating very well. In fact, it's so good that we are wondering, why can't they use the lessons of this collaboration to also take into the elections? Because when elections come in Nigeria, the collaboration can be anything but what you want to see. In spite of all this collaboration, there has been massive human rights violations involved. Like I talked about corporal punishment and all of that. And at a certain point, Nigerians, we are comparing the number of citizens who have lost their lives from security agencies, in terms that from security agencies being quick with the trigger and all of that, than those that COVID-19 was actually taking down. So at a point, you had more citizens dying from police shootings than COVID-19. Mercifully, that has reduced a great deal. This was more in the early days, but even at that, you begin to wonder why this was happening. The Inspector General of the Police has been commendably quick to act when this happens. The Police Service Commission, which I belong as the oversight body, unfortunately, has not been as strong as it should be, owing to two big things, which I think it's also the story in most African countries. One is the infrastructure. You have the Police Service Commission that is localized in just the Federal Capital Territory and some big cities in the country. But this lockdown is about the communities, and you can't find our presence there. So our reaction to this has been, on a scale of 1 to 10, I put it at 2 over 10, if you ask me, which is not very good. Of course, we have other agencies like the National Human Rights Commission, the citizens groups, for example, that have done wonderfully well. I believe CS groups, more than any other agency or more than any other body, has been very, very strong in bringing to fore the human rights abuses that are happening, and also trying to get remedial measures being put in place. So in terms of preparation by the government, has our government been really prepared? And I would say this is a pandemic that just happened, if you ask me. Even though African countries had some bit of time to put our house together, because this started more in Europe and in Asia. But African countries, again, we still, in my own opinion, did not react quick enough in trying to meet the challenges. And this accounts for why suddenly things are going overboard in numbers and in all of that. I fear, and I hope it doesn't come to that we don't begin to see the kind of magnitude of what is going on in other countries in Africa. Because if that happens, then it will really, really be a very terrible and sad situation given our level of preparedness. And I think finally for me, the issue of media again, especially the social media, has done so very much. I just would want to see some more of a connect between civil society organizations and the media. As it is now, they seem to be going in different lanes, but when they do come together, they can be a very formidable force in putting pressure on government to do the right thing and stand up to its responsibility. On a final note, I think for me, preparations and reactions and whatever should be community-based. It should be contextualized to our communities. For example, why don't we say people should use more of masks and hand gloves than saying they should stay at home when they need to eat, when they need to feed? These are some of the things we need to look at. How much are we bringing communities into the conversation and all of that? And I would want to say that the police can also be trained with specific. The pandemic is not going away tomorrow, and I think for me this also is room to train for us to have a much more pro-human rights approach to the pandemic. Thank you so very much.
Thank you so much. That was just right on the 8th minute. But I'm really interested in something, because you wear double hats, like I mentioned. What do you think should be the role of civil society? I know you have mentioned the role of the media as a veritable tool in all of this, but civil society critically, how should they promote, right-based approach, really, especially for civil society organizations that are working around human rights issues, security sector reform, police reform, and all of that? If you could just do that in, say, 15 seconds, we'll appreciate it.
Yeah, I think in Nigeria, I speak in Nigerian context, we have the National Human Rights Commission, which is there at a rallying point, and it's also a quasi-governmental body. I think it's a big event. It's a big space for civil society groups to play around there and get government to do the right thing. We have the Police Service Commission, which is representative of all civil society organizations in terms of private sector, media, women, human rights, and all of that. These are institutions that we can work with in trying to get government to do the right thing.
I would crave the indulgence of audience. If anyone has just a quick question, because Barrister Romy has to run along. If you have let's take one or two questions. Renuka is asking, what in our minds? Let me see, is that a question for Romy? Okay, yeah, she's asking what in our minds should be the police priorities in Nigeria. She's asking what should be the police priorities in Nigeria.
Yeah, I think for me, the police should center more on education and awareness creation when people try to, violate the lockdown. It's not about assault and all of that or use of brute force. It's about the fact that this is for your own good. It's about distributing masks. It's about giving people. So we need to get all those things with the police. And you send people back with face masks and sanitizers if they're there, educate them on what it is and all of that. I think human rights is an important element, and a human rights approach for me, sensitization and awareness, even by the police officers as they are, will do more in trying to get us to be more compliant than getting persons worked up and all of that, and trying to tempers, I guess, don't carry us anywhere. There must be reason. Reason must be the center point, case in human rights.
All right, thank you so much. I see additional question, one related to the role of the National Human Rights Commission, and I can answer a bit on that. The National Human Rights Commission has been very, very proactive. So we've seen a report, a very comprehensive report that it issued out some weeks ago, whilst the lockdown was still a bit fresh. And that report also captures the numbers of Nigerian citizens that have been killed, have been injured in one way or the other as a result of the high-handedness of security actors. So SACET is just to say that the National Human Rights Commission in Nigeria has been very, very proactive, and it's, for me as a civil society practitioner, it has really inspired confidence in me, in the work that I do. Yeah. Final words before we let you go. So you're free to leave, Barrister Romi.
Yeah, thank you so very much. I am somewhere in Benue State, which is some 300 miles away from Abuja, and I have to get into Abuja today. That is why I'm leaving now. So pardon me, but I think I would hopefully go through the recorded audios of this meeting and get to hear what my colleagues will say. I'm really very sorry, but I have to travel to Abuja this afternoon. Thank you so very much for giving me the time to be here.
Thank you so much for your time too. We really appreciate your perspective. I'm now going to invite from India, Dr. K.M. Parivilan. Please, apologies if I don't know if I got that correctly. He is the chairperson, Center for Statelessness and Refugee Studies, School of Law, Rights and Constitutional Governance at the Tata Institute for Social Science. So he's going to share the Indian's perspective with us. I saw sometime in March, there was a very terrifying video that I saw on social media, on Twitter particularly, looking at Indian police. There was 2 to 3 Indian policemen who were beating some lockdown violators, as the case may be, and at some point they asked them to be, doing sit-up, push-ups, and all of that. Those were very, very dehumanizing treatment. Subjecting someone to those kind of because they came out to try to get 1 or 2 things to feed on. Barrister Romi said something that is very strategic for me. He said that the economic aspect of this makes all of this very, very challenging. You can't proclaim a lockdown without putting in place adequate social protection measures, and that is very, very important. But I know Dr. Parivilan is here, and I will invite him now to just take the next 8 minutes to share with us police response in India. Have there been good practices that you think that other countries can learn of? What has been the civil society response in India, and everything that you can share with us on this team, right-based approach to pandemic policing. Thank you. Dr. Parivilan, are you there?
Yes, he's there. I can see him. You'll have to unmute yourself, Dr. Parivalan.
Gabriel, is there any technical support you can provide from your end to him?
I could see him just now.
I think he's having bad internet.
So should we move to the next speaker then?
Yes, exactly. So let's give him some time to sort his out himself. So we'll welcome Julie Wayua. Julie is of the ICJ, the International Commission of Jurists, Kenya, and she's a senior program officer at the ICJ. The ICJ is also a part of the working group on police reform in Kenya. Julie, you're welcome.
Thank you very much, Ruth, and thank you very much, Prof, for organizing this. I hope everyone can hear me. Kindly nod if you can. All right. As you've been told, my name is Julie Wayua. I work with the International Commission of Jurists. This is a non-government organization in Kenya that draws membership from advocates, lawyers, legal practitioners, judges and magistrates, and actually law students. So we have a wealth of knowledge. And part of the ICJ work is human rights documentation, democracy, rule of law, advocacy on certain issues, research, and public and policy development. So we have been engaging the security sector actors in this front. So what happened is we were working with security sector actors on a vast number of issues. Most importantly, which we were working on was psychosocial support for police officers. And then the COVID pandemic happened. So in Kenya, we got our first case on 13th of March 2020. This was the first official case that was reported in Kenya, and following which a vast number of directives were issued. For example, at that moment, it was directed that no person will be arrested and detained in police centers. As a matter of fact, you were entitled to bail and bond policies at that time. Another directive that we believe is in tandem completely with policing was that the courts will not be operating in their normal function. So if you're arrested, you would then be released on bail, and the police would have discretion to assert whether this is a case that ought to go before the courts. So this, we noted, gave a lot of discretion to police officers, which they subsequently abused. So I will speak towards that. Yesterday, the latest data we have from Kenya is that yesterday we had 582 cases of COVID-19. Of those cases, 26 people have passed on from the disease. Now, I'll flip side that. From the point of the announcement to yesterday, we have 15 persons who have died from police-related issues. So you see that COVID-19 was announced, and then thereafter, we have a raft of issues that occurred. So going by the conversation that was, the outline of the conversation that we have, first of all, we note that human rights policing is something that most civil society organizations have been advocating for the longest time. We have been working towards this, and we have pushed the police service to have professionalism, strict legality, creation of accountability mechanisms, both internally and externally. So they have the Internal Affairs Unit, which is in charge of creating oversight mechanisms within the police service, and the Independent Policing Oversight Authority, which creates oversight by the civilians. We have also asked for transparency, budgets, how much money has been allocated to the police service, and especially during this period, we have wanted to find out what is the amount of money specifically directed to emergency response by the police service in order for them to act. We have also encouraged a proper relationship between the public and the police officers, because during this period, we have noted that one of the greatest principles of policing, which is trust and community, has led and contributed to the degeneration of the work, because there is no trust between the community and the police. This is as a result of the number of people who have unfortunately passed on at the hands of police. So those are the principles and the applicability of the principles during this period. So from 13th, we have issued a vast number of statements. I remember on the 26th of March, the president, in a response to curbing COVID-19, directed that we will now have a curfew. The curfew was to run from 7 p.m. to 5 a.m. So during this period, people could not walk around, people could not leave their houses. And as expected, and unfortunately as expected, the first day was absolute chaos. So in the coastal region, they have to cross via ferry. Police brutality began at 5 p.m., not after the curfew, but at 5 p.m. In Nairobi, scenes were witnessed at 6:30, 30 minutes before the curfew period. So we noted that the police addressed themselves to the issues in a riotous manner, treating this as if it's a public order issue as opposed to a public health issue. And that is something as civil society we tasked ourselves to bring on board, that the response was not in tandem with, or it's not a riot issue, it's not an electoral overthrowing issue. However, it is a health management issue. So in response to that as well, we issued policing guidelines on distance conscious and human rights policing. So what these guidelines are ways in which the police can effect their mandate but also protecting themselves. Because more often than not, we forget that the police are people. So we issued these guidelines, which involve the restriction on the use of tear gas, the restriction on the use of force in the implementation of the curfew, and relevant measures to curb the spread of the disease. And these were issued publicly. The other thing we called for was the Inspector General of Police giving us the guidelines that he was using to direct his police officers for interrogation by the public and civil society. This would enable us to understand the mindset and the frame of mind that police officers use to go in to the streets, to go into the community, because we would want to understand, are you protecting people or are you enforcing the law at the expense of protection? So you see that there is that strict dichotomy which you wanted to understand, and unfortunately the response has not been positive in regards to that request. So that is in regards to the first question that you posited to me. How has it been? Now I will quickly run through the other questions that I'm sure are important for this conversation, which are, what is the level of preparedness? Unfortunately, as is in the case in Nigeria, the preparedness was not at optimum. We found that we were also caught flat-footed. Even if we had cases in Italy and Germany and other respective countries, we were also caught flat-footed. So an emergency response team was put in place, but as I've previously mentioned, the mentality that was carried forward in the implementation of the curfew was all but a health pandemic type of address, but a public order management type of address. The collaboration, however, has been stellar. We have had proper collaboration between the police, the justice actors, the Office of the Director of Public Prosecution, the human rights organization. So we have had a situation whereby we have had to adapt as a country to what is happening. So you have had various justice actors adapting efficiently. And we have also had the injection of the private sector towards the response. So we have had private sector actually coming up to support the police. So they have donated the kits, they have donated uniforms that are in tandem with the work that they are doing overnight. They have actually contributed a lot to the protective gear that the police are using. So we have had a lot of interagency collaboration during this period. And the media has done a fantastic job. In regards to the police violations, I've spoken about the killings that have happened. And unfortunately, in Kenya, we have a killing of a young person who was just standing on his balcony. The family was in the house, the children were on the balcony looking at what was happening on the streets, and unfortunately, the child was shot. And you've also noted that there is an over-policing in certain places, which means that there is a discrimination in informal settlements, which is something that we have also raised an alarm around. Why is there specific policing in certain areas as opposed to others? And there is a discrimination in regards to how it is being handled altogether. So we have witnessed police brutality, lots of killings, lots of, right now we are currently pursuing an issue of disappearance. There are 3 human rights defenders who have gone missing, so we're also following that up. People are being beaten. It's not a secret, it's on the news. People are being beaten, people are being frog-marched, people are being threatened and intimidated. So we are having the whole spectrum of injustices. But this has also been flagged off by the parliament. This has also been a subject of discussion in the media. This has been a subject of discussion in the public. So the public is engaged in the discussion and querying and questioning the cabinet secretary and the inspector general on the measures that they are taking and why they are taking such drastic measures towards policing. In regards to what we can do, what can we do better? I feel like this is cross-cutting. As people, as civil society organizations, we need to do more documentation. We need to be the reason why we need to hold the government to account. So documentation is important because without documentation, they will say that these instances did not happen. Advocacy on issues. Institutions have held webinars, public fora, discussion, innovative ways to even have conversation like this whilst we are at home. Because so long as we are quiet, then it's not happening. So discussions, advocacy and communication, legal reform, and policy development. As civil society, as government, as practitioners, we need to be in the room when these policies are being developed, because unfortunately, without a human rights perspective and approach to the development of policy, you will run the risk of policies being developed with a security lens as opposed to a human rights lens. And that is where we are right now. Most of the policies are being developed in a strict security protocol type of way, without any regard for the fact that people have real reasons, legitimate reasons for circumventing the curfew, for example. So we are hoping that there will be more inclusion and more involvement going forward. So I think that I can address now, and the rest I can take up in question and answer. Thank you very much, Ruth.
Thank you very much, Julie. That was really, really rich. I want to pose something to you, and I'll appreciate if you can answer very quickly. So a writer once said that should the police be on the roads with batons, with guns and all of that in a pandemic such as this? He was of the view that the police should rather be seen with information pamphlets, should be seen with face masks distributing to the public. How do you react to such a recommendation?
Whereas I agree in that the batons are not necessary during this period, I also am aware and alive to the fact that not everyone has good intentions. So we need to have a dichotomy of both. We need to have the information sharing and giving, but at the same time, we need to ensure that the lives of people are still protected, because we cannot say in a community of 100 people that all of them are okay. There's always that one bad element, and unfortunately, they take opportunity in this situation. So yes, I do believe that the police should be armed, properly kitted. However, they have standing orders that exist, and therefore, before they use force, have they exhausted the reasonable structures and amenities available to them to ensure that they don't go to the extreme? That is my thought on that.
Thank you. Excellent response. Quickly, Professor Renuka is asking, is there any collaboration between the police and community leadership in terms of social fencing, safeguarding of communities by local elders, really, in the Kenya perspective?
Yes, in Kenya we have, sorry, there's an echo. In Kenya we have different types of community leadership. So we have the Nyumba Kumi initiative, which is centered around 10 households, the theory, but not the practicality. 10 households know each other and elect a leader, and as such, that leader represents them. So the Nyumba Kumi leadership has been engaging very well with the police, because you note that we are under curfew. And there are certain parts of this country that are restricted to movement. So without that leadership, you wouldn't be able to know who has moved from one place to another. So indeed, there is need and has been need for community dialogue. So yes, you have the grassroots leaders working very closely with the police. However, again, the issue of trust has come up, whereby community leaders are also asking, we are working in tandem with the police and giving them the requisite information. Why are they killing our people? So they are attempting, there is a deliberate partnership, however, it is strained by the continued actions of some police officers.
Thank you. So we'll now move on to, I see Dr. Parivilan. Thank you, Julie. There are questions. I'm sure you can respond to them via the chat box. We'll move on to Dr. Parivilan. Can you hear us, Doctor? Okay, exactly. Some few minutes before now, I was saying that I saw a horrifying video on Twitter of Indian police, subjecting citizens to very humiliating, treatment as a result of lockdown violations. What has been the climate so far in India in terms of police response in this pandemic? Has there been accountability? Like in the case of Nigeria, although not a very perfect case, but we've seen some very swift response from the Inspector General of Police, especially when it concerns women, really. If police officers are violating the rights of women, there have been very, very quick actions to bring such officers to account. Share with us in the next 8 minutes your thoughts in terms of the Indian perspective. Thank you. You're welcome.
Yeah. Thank you very much. And at the outset, my apologies for some technical glitches. Thanks for facilitating. I also appreciate this very timely and very relevant webinar to connect people across Asia, Africa to deliberate on this important issue. Well, I would like to place, my thinking, random thoughts on 3 broad framework. One, looking at per se the COVID pandemic, how it has caused the general impact. Then what are the measures taken in India, in particular with the backdrop of, handling hazards or natural disasters, including the biological one, what we are undergoing, and the role of policing. And what are the lessons learned with certain illustrations and way forward? Broadly, this is the framework. Well, we all know that this is a kind of a global pandemic which is very unprecedented in terms of its impact in all spheres of human activity and environment. The scale, proportion, intensity, magnitude is something very unprecedented in the recent times. Therefore, it is also caused a lot of stress in terms of developing the adequate policies and relevant framework and implementation, and how the agencies, law enforcing agencies, are handling this matter. So we know there are high numbers on an everyday basis. In India, we have had 3 phases of the lockdown. By and large, phase 1 was from 25th March to 14th April. And the second phase was from 15th April to 3rd May. And the third phase from 14th May to now likely up to 17th May, we have to look at it. So the lockdown, by and large, is seen as a measure. Globally, it is done in India as well. It is appreciated by WHO and other bodies that India has done it in a timely manner, the lockdown. But the lockdown also comes with certain unprecedented powers to the government structures, including the police mechanism, which is what we are just going to do. I'm also going to kind of look at how we are handling, again, into 3 phases further. Looking at one in terms of detection and early warning as an pre-disaster phase or pre-pandemic phase, how it went about. And what is the preparedness, prevention, and ongoing response during this phase? And what also probably could be there in the post-lockdown as a post-disaster phase. I'm just looking at the 3 which are very important, interconnected. I should also backdrop in India. Fairly, we have an interesting mechanism to address the natural disasters, including the biological variety, called the National Disaster Management Authority. It came sometime around the post-Indian Ocean tsunami around 2005, where we have a National Disaster Management Act, which is a legal framework, and we have these institutional mechanisms at the national level, at the state level, provincial states, and at the local levels, district and sub-district levels. That's how we have broadly the structure of disaster response. Now, particularly the Ministry of Health has been given the lead to handle it. And of course, missionaries like police are there to assist and facilitate. That's how the interlinkage comes in. So disasters in India, again, are handled by the Ministry of Home. And police also, comes very much underneath that. Now, with this kind of a backdrop structure, how it works, because I wanted to come into reflecting on how it works and what are the kind of remedial measures, looking at some of the good practices and lessons learned, one has to also do it. So the lockdown, by and large, in India, with 1.3 billion people, with a very diverse socioeconomic conditions, is something very important. And the lockdown has also proportionally had a severe impact on the vulnerable and marginalized groups. I would like to bring that into context, what role the police also played in that. One is, after the sudden announcement of the lockdown, we in India had seen an unprecedented situation of people, particularly the migrant workers within India from the rural parts of India who had come to the urban areas of cities and towns, actually got stranded, and they all wanted to return to their homes. That itself became a very huge pressure for the police to handle it. So the restriction had that impact because of the suspension of all transport services, air, rail, road, and all the only except essential service, all others were sort of curtailed. So that had actually brought in a huge pressure. I would call it the tussle between these marginalized and vulnerable groups versus the police. The estimation was almost around 139 million migrant workers who are actually stranded, staggering huge numbers. And they came into a lot of pressure, particularly. So now looking at the role of police in specific now in this whole context of pandemic and its impact, one, I see that there has been an increase in powers given to the police vis-a-vis the public health response in terms of enforcing lockdown measures, preventing gatherings, physical distancing, and so on and so forth. The second is also to reduce the flow of people into criminal legal system and prisons as part of the public health response. India did not go in a very big way to bring out people from the prisons or bringing them out, and that is something which we need to see. So now I'll just bring few examples, illustrations. For example, in the city of Mumbai, where I'm located, Tata Institute of Social Sciences, very much in the city, we saw an instance where near the Bandra railway station, a couple of weeks back, anxious migrant workers gathered in large numbers when the second phase of lockdown was getting announced. They got anxious that they would like to now return. The very gathering, rather than handling that in a very humane manner, the police actually used a lot of force to disperse the people because the people who gathered apparently did not follow any kind of social distancing or physical distancing. For this reason, they were all there was use of force, and that had tremendously already feeling the brunt of the lockdown without any wages, without any proper food or other support. Government, however, claims that they have been regularly supplying them with all the shelter, food and water, things like that. But the migrant workers were feeling very restless. In a similar manner, it has cross-cutting effect on vendors, small-scale industries, micro, mini industries, and enormously. I'm not going to the economic sector much, but this pressure was seen in a similar manner what we had witnessed in Mumbai in many parts of the urban India, where when people wanted to return, there wasn't any facilitation done. But very fortunately or positively, that in the recent time, just in the last few days, the government in coordination with the provincial states are trying to address that particular issue in terms of facilitating the return. We need to see that part of it. That is one. Secondly, coming to the example of the food chain and its impact. In a way, if you look at it, when they announced that except essential goods, all other things would be stopped, there wasn't clarity on what is essential goods and what kind of a thing. So the policemen on the streets were stopping many workers transporting essential goods or people going to some of the essential factories and other related works. So this friction was also witnessed when there was no clarity issued on that, except for example, in some parts of India, overall the disaster response, disaster act has been enforced. The very pandemic called the Epidemic Act came in. Even there was an amendment to the Epidemic Act, and they tried to implement it. So the food chain related issues on the ground were a big problem. The third example I would like to bring in is also in India. Just around the first week of March, there was an infamous gathering called the Tablighi Jamaat religious congregation in Delhi, Nizamuddin, where allegedly a lot of people, it was also reported in media that it is a kind of a coronavirus super spreader, quote unquote, where they identified more than 4,000 cases were happened through this incident. What I'd like to highlight here is the role of police coming here. What did the police do in terms when the gathering was happening, in terms of permission, in terms of the gathering when the event was happening? But just after the event, there was an attempt to bring in a kind of a communal color to it, that the particular religious group is, paved the way for spreading it. I feel that these again, police institution mechanism could have been much more proactive to dispel this kind of a thing. And then in India we follow the secular framework in our constitution. There's no way that we could blame any particular religious group. This again as an incident I would like to just flag quickly on this part. And the fourthly, I just wanted to give an example of how the misuse of travel pass by the police machinery. There was a case in Maharashtra where the business, one particular business family, influential business family, was caught traveling from Kandala to Mahabaleshwar with a police pass issued by a senior official. This expose again by the media brings in the how certain powerful and influential people could actually misuse all this movement pass system, which is very only meant for emergency. This is a case I just wanted to bring in. So you have by and large on one side, police in India, has been given the special powers to respond to this pandemic situation. And they also have done their good job by and large, but they were also reported of excess because the guidance and framework of familiarization to this kind of situation isn't there. India have had several other, natural disasters, but they have been, there for a few days, weeks, where the police response role is there. But now in this prolonged lockdown, they are unable to have any clarity. They are unable to have an experience of how to deal in a humane manner. I just would like to flag again here that it has been reported
as a way of summarizing.
Yes, please.
No, I said as a way of summarizing your thoughts. Finally.
Yes, I'm just summarizing. Thank you. Yeah. So, for example, many parts of India, it is seen that the policemen were doing a good job with being in the forefront, and they were also at times misusing their powers in terms of handling the people. For example, in Maharashtra, the Home Minister has come up with the statistics that nearly about 500 policemen are tested COVID positive. This has been the similar case in other parts of India as well. Now, the question here comes in when police machinery, particularly the constabulary, when they are in the forefront, have we given them adequate orientation? Have we given them adequate safeguards, masks, gloves and other equipments becomes a question mark. I'd like to wrap up by saying that, we need to have a proper capacity building trainings in the peace times for the police personnel to handle these kind of situations, one. Number two, the constabulary, which is in the forefront, needs much more equipments and other infrastructural facilities to handle this kind of a situation. And thirdly, I would say that yes, there has to be a good collaboration between civil society and police institutions, because civil society wasn't allowed much to come forward, even to provide food, water to the stranded people, stranded migrant workers, where it put an enormous pressure again. So I feel that there has to be a coordination, there has to be a way of interface between various agencies, including the police institutions, police personnel, in terms of responding to this very unprecedented situation. These are my initial thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was a lot and very, very rich. I'm really concerned about a country like India that is over 1 billion. How do you practice social distancing? But critically, when we talk about right-based approach to pandemic policing, all that we have seen in terms of the social media videos here and there, and that is just what we are seeing. For those cases that are not reported, that are not there in the public domain, the question will be that how are we able to hold these officers, Indian police officers that have violated the rights of citizens? Have there been any kind of quick measures in terms of bringing these officers to account for the rights violations?
Right. India does have its own, internal compliance authority. For example, there's a police compliance authority, which in the peacetime is supposed to be the oversight body to monitor. But during this pandemic, we did not, see such kind of signals coming in that there could be, a kind of oversight bodies and others will monitor it. We do have fairly also the National Human Rights Commission and State Human Rights Commissions, which are there. We did not see them coming up and doing any kind of sumoto things where they are able to guide or monitor or assist. We did not see them. Normal times we see them taking many a times sumoto initiatives and fairly, they do respond, they do involve. But we do not see such oversight bodies coming in and playing any proactive role during this lockdown.
This is serious, to say the least, and that is to say that it's just going to be normalized. Violence within the pandemic period will be seen as a normal part of the whole response by the police, by security agencies to the pandemic. Thank you so much, Dr. Parivilan. There are questions. I will just check quickly if anyone has a question. So we have a participant asking that we have observed racism in this pandemic. Security officials are used as tools in perpetrating racism, torture, and chase out immigrants, particularly in Asian countries. Did you observe that in India? And I think you have mentioned that, but quickly.
Yeah, very quickly to respond. As I mentioned earlier, the migrant workers by and large are the socially vulnerable population in India, the tribal population and the scheduled caste population in India, or the other backward caste population who migrate to urban areas. I think, if not a very clear discrimination, but definitely there has been a huge negligence both at the policy level and the way they were handled. And I think that is something, a very serious matter of concern. I agree that the rights-based approach is very important to apply in this kind of a context. And that was a big lacune, I should say. And there's a big way we need to see that how they are able to get back to their homes and feel safe, and then get their livelihoods again. That's something very important. As the saying goes, we are trying to attempt to flatten the curve in terms of the COVID corona virus, but we are also parallelly flattening our economy. I think it's a big matter of concern how these vulnerable groups are going to be made inclusive and the livelihoods to be restored. Yes, that's a big concern.
Excellent. Thank you so much for your time. So our last speaker, she's a woman, and she's from South Africa. Her name is Anne-Lindsay van Wyk. Please pardon me if I got that murdered that. So Anne-Lindsay is a trustee at APCOF. APCOF is the African Policing Civilian Oversight Forum. She's a trustee there, and she is the past chairperson at the South African National Assembly Portfolio Committee on the police. So Anne-Lindsay, you're welcome to share your experiences. I've seen somebody also put out a chat there to say that they've noticed some kind of similarities between the response by the police in Kenya and South Africa, and I would also like you to touch upon that. Have there been good practices that you think that countries in Africa and Asia can learn from? And share with us in the next 8 minutes what's been happening in South Africa. Thank you.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much for the opportunity and the initiative. Look, I think we live in strange times, that we all can agree about. That many of our rights have been limited in this period. But the important thing is to remember that the Constitution and the human rights have not been abandoned, and that we should be on the lookout to make sure that it actually gets protected even in these times. In South Africa, it's not much different from what we've heard happening in many of the other countries that presented already today. The police is the main agency that are enforcing the lockdown. They do so in collaboration with the South African National Defence Force that have been deployed in support of them. Now, according to South African law, the police would be the lead agency and the National Defence Force would be under the command of the police at that point. But where there is no police officer present, the National Defence Force would have the same powers as a police officer, with the exception of not being allowed to investigate. We have seen throughout this time already abuses happening. I think, let me just stop for a minute. We have one of the severest lockdowns. I think that's been acknowledged throughout the world. We have taken away the sale of alcohol. We have banned the sale of cigarettes. People are homebound. There's a curfew in place from 8 o'clock in the evening to 5 o'clock in the morning. So the police must enforce all of this. And they must also look at things like regulations of transport, of the distribution that takes place of food, etc., etc. All of this happened very, very quickly. And I want to take you through the timeline that happened in South Africa to give you an idea of how quickly it happened. On the 15th of March, South Africa was declared a national disaster on the basis of the coronavirus. On the 23rd of March, the president declared a lockdown, effective from the 26th of March. On the 25th of March, a day before the lockdown, in fact, hours before the lockdown came into effect, regulations were published. And we are now expecting the security services through the South African Police Services to police these regulations. Many of these regulations are quite vague, they're ambiguous, and continuously people are starting to see them as being arbitrary. So there's also a rising uncomfortableness about the lockdown, a rising rebellious feeling amongst the citizenship about the lockdown. 2 weeks prior to the lockdown, we have been in social isolation. So South Africa has actually been 43 days in lockdown, plus an added 14 days of social distancing. The speed with which all of this has been done clearly left very little time for planning within the police services, and I think for adequate training. And that you can see by the way that things are rolling out on the ground. We have seen, unfortunately, as have been reported in some of the other countries, that also in South Africa, there's a discrimination in terms of how it's policed, depending on where it's being policed. When I get stopped at the police roadblock, I would be handled quite courteously because there would be an expectation that I would know my rights and I've got the ability to appoint a lawyer should I be treated wrongly. In the areas where the police are focusing, which is mainly our poorer areas, our township areas, etc., and where it's far more difficult to actually social distance and to actually have a lockdown, there the police are far more tending to be hard-handed, dishing out physical exercises to people that they find that have lockdowns. We have seen on videos that has been spread where people are physically handled and mishandled, and where they are throwing people in the back of vans without taking care about the human rights at all. The South African National Defence Force, in the first few days of the lockdown, have made themselves guilty, specifically, of handing out physical exercise to citizens where they found them to be in breach of the lockdown. This has resulted in some very harsh criticism from throughout, especially after the president in his deployment of the police and the National Defence Force have told them that this is in support of and not to police. The South African citizenship is not the enemy and they are not the ones to be policed. I think, like many other countries, we are missing an opportunity. The police, the defense, the metro police officers, which we have in our metros, are having an us and them approach with the citizens of South Africa. I would have liked to see that there would have been a role for the police where they are actually distributing information, where they are informing people, where they are educating people about the lockdown, and where they warn someone and educate them rather than lock them up. Within the first 2 weeks of the lockdown, we've had 17,000 arrests already. At some point in the lockdown, there were more deaths as a result of police action and defense force action than there were coronavirus deaths. This has now stabilized a bit, but it doesn't mean that we don't have problems. Collaboration between the state bodies have been quite good. Between the police and the defense, clearly it's been adequate and it's been good. Metro police, there are more problems around metro policing. It's also a question of training, I believe. There's also more politics within metro police because your metros are not always governed by the same party that governs governs the country or the province. So there's politics involved in that as well. We have seen a good effort, I think, a commendable effort by the media to highlight abuses. We have seen a very, very good effort by social media, and which means the citizens themselves mostly, in publishing abuses by the police, by the defense force, by private security, and by the, Metro Police officers. The Independent Police Investigative Directorate, who's the main body to investigate abuses by the police, are busy doing so. They have finalized some cases, but the first case that have been finalized raises questions about the effectiveness of these investigations as well. The person died after being harassed by the police and being mishandled by the police, physically abused by the police, died at his home with what was said a heart attack. And the police then, the Independent Police Investigative Directorate then confirmed that it was, in his investigation, a heart attack. It does not take in consideration the circumstances that have led to the heart attack of that individual. It's also unclear, and I think that might be a problem for civil society as well. What are the operational instructions of the police and the defense and the Metro Police in this lockdown? Another problem that we have seen throughout is the fact that the South African Police Service specifically have sort of abandoned their normal crime fighting responsibilities. They claim that crime has gone down, which one can understand because of the lockdown. But when people go to police stations to actually report cases, they are turned away from the police station. I personally was threatened with arrest when I wanted to get a statement affidavit done by them. And people that have been reporting crimes are told that they can't report now because this is not a priority for them at this stage. This obviously is nonsense. It has been addressed also by the state, but it should be addressed far more comprehensively, and the message should go out to the police as well. What we also find is that many police police the area. Differs from how they police in one area to another. And I'm not talking here about the difference that I've talked about in terms of poor versus more empowered people. No, this is like an understanding. So a police station would have a specific understanding and another police station would have a different understanding of the regulation. So there's no comprehensive and a common understanding of regulation. So one gets that there's an unevenness in how they actually police these regulations. There is no uniformity, and that obviously leads to frustration by the citizens of the country as well.
To begin to round up, yeah.
Yeah, I'm on my last point. My biggest concern in all of this actually is the civil society. Sorry, can I just 2 points? The one is civil society has come to the party in a coalition called Covid-19 is one of them, and they are working with Human Rights Commission of South Africa and trying to monitor these, and have come up also with a reporting mechanism that's online for people to report abuses by the police or the defense force. The one thing that does come clear out of this is that we do need, as part of basic training, I think a better focus on not human rights only, but on how do we police natural disasters, how do we police these kinds of things that are happening. And the question that I have, and I'm also posing to the rest of us, is how do we step out of this back into normality and rebuild the trust that has now been lost between police and the citizens of a country. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your time. So I'll go to our chat box. There are 1 or 2 questions there for you and comments. I want you to react to a question by one of the participants, and that is, he's asking that, sorry, just a minute. Okay. Sorry, some technical glitch there. Yeah. So he's asking, how do we mainstream pandemic policing into post-COVID-19 policing and security sector reform in developing countries? You can take a shot at that question. How do we mainstream pandemic policing into looking at post-COVID-19? How should the police go about its duties? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's exactly the last point that I've made as well, is that I think, how do we go out from this? How do we go back to normal? And also, how do we take the lessons that we've learned throughout this forward? And one of the things that I would think that is important is that we actually do have training, even if it's not part of the broader training, but that we have specific training within police colleges that empowers certain police officers to have this training, to understand that when you police a pandemic like this, it's not the same as policing an ordinary crime. And that we then deploy these officers when the pandemic strikes throughout the countries to take command in certain areas, so that that message can get filtered down to the ordinary police officer who must do it. Can I also say we must also, throughout this, remember that our police officers are human beings as well. And in my discussions with police officers on the street, where they do not get the sufficient protection themselves in terms of masks and material hand gloves and things like that, is their own fear for their own family and for themselves as well. And I think we need to have that empathy and sympathy, and that also needs to form part of the training, not only for them, but for the politicians who must provide for this going forward.
Yeah, thank you. At the level of the Clean Foundation, we are also part of the NGO sector organizations who are campaigning really every day in our press releases about the need to protect the police institution, the police officers that are out there on the front line. And I think you have made a very good submission to that. The floor is open. In the next 5 minutes, we'll be rounding up all of this. Julie, if you're still there, Dr. Parivilan, are you still there? The audience, if there are questions for the participants, please, this is the time. Let's take the next 5 minutes to ask questions. It's an open mic now. I will moderate that session. Questions, comments? Are there participants willing to share their experience from their country in one minute, really?
Just for me to come in, Parivelan again here from India, to come in, just to add a point that, reflecting on this pandemic, somebody also asked about post-pandemic response, what happens to policing. I think it's a reflection that we need to provide adequate capacity building training on how to coordinate with various other agencies, particularly the civil society, constituting media and other things, where I would emphasize that we need to have a community participatory approach rather than community controlled approach, which we are witnessing now. Thank you.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. To me, I'm Wale Ogwade. I'm speaking from Lagos, and I really appreciate this program. And of course, it has given us insight into this issue of the security and policing. And I really appreciate the speaker from Uganda. And my own experience is that the policemen are not really kitted. And it seems the last speaker said it. And I think we should, as civil society organization, should ensure that before these policemen go on their duty on the road, they should be given kits. And of course, it will be our duty to really show, because the politicians are in the safety and the comfort of their homes and their rooms. And these people are on the streets. They are the ones enforcing all these directives. And if they are, as they, to me, are even the most important frontline workers, because they get in touch with these people who are taken to the hospital. They get in touch with those who are infected. And you see, some of them are non-masked. The only thing they carry around is their gun. And you ask that question. I don't see the gun working against this virus. It is their hygiene situation that will work against it. So to me, I think we should all work in this regard and ensure that the politicians really kit them. They are the first liners, as I would say, and if they are kitted, then they will be able to have that confidence of doing their work. And of course, we will promote this idea that indeed there should be enough leaflet printed for them to distribute to people. That will be what they will use to fight this project, not their guns and baton. There is no need dehumanizing people. Really, if you look at it very well, most Nigerians, particularly Africans too, live on this daily subsistence. And as far as I'm concerned, the palliatives have not gone around. And if it has not gone around, there are people who have children at home. And I don't know, maybe I've experienced it when the kid is hungry and you say there is no food, there is lockdown. He will look at you and say, "What are you talking, daddy? Please, I need food." And he will start crying and embarrassing you. And no parent will want to see his child crying, suffering. And the best thing is to look for what to make the boy happy or the girl happy. And if, again, you don't have food, money at home, you go out. And you go out, the police gets you. And the police gets you. You have taken care of yourself anyway. You want to even practice social distancing. The policeman has been infected by somebody, and he comes and he's talking to you. His droplets falls on your hand or your body or your car.
Yeah.
So, terrible thing. So that's just my own contribution. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much. We cannot emphasize enough the need for the police to be well kitted, to be well protected against the virus. And I think COVID-19 presents an excellent opportunity for police and law enforcement institutions to step back and reflect on, should we police pandemic the way we have been carrying on traditional policing? Dr. Enuka, I will welcome you to take the final shot and just wrap up this section in, say, about 2 to 3 minutes. Thank you, everyone. I'll formally hand over to Professor Enuka to just wrap this up for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth. What an excellent job you've done to get everybody perspectives focused and left a lot of issues for us to ponder on. I think one thing that's been hitting me again and again is that the police is in a position and being given a role which is not constitutional. So they're not doing crime prevention. They're not. This is not the traditional role. They're unequipped to do it. There's lack of collaboration, and they're really not. They really don't have guidelines how to move forward. Yet they're the ones who have to contain this pandemic. So we'll see how things pan out as we go along. I think the civil society and the media has been doing a great job, and we expect that the police and the governments will also get their act together as this pandemic doesn't seem to be going away soon. I wanted to thank all our attendees and participants for being on this platform, for spending the time, giving us time to be to share views. And I would also like to remind everyone that our webinar series will be carrying on every Thursday. And for the next Thursday, we're going to be moving a little beyond policing and moving to governance for access to justice, the emerging issues COVID and post-COVID-19. So we look to see how the collaborations can move beyond the police, because the police is at one level a tool, and how can we strategize to equip them to be more citizen-centric and human rights-based. So thank you again, all of you, for being here, and look forward to seeing you next week. Thanks, Ruth. You did a great job.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for your time. Bye, Julie. Dr. Parivan, thank you, everyone. See you next Thursday.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you. Bye-bye.
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 Bye. Great. Oh, yeah. You did excellent.